So picture this. It's November 2nd, 1990. We're in Miami Beach. And, it's a pretty typical morning for a crew of workers from the Florida Power and Light Company.
Right.
They're just doing their rounds, cutting back some vegetation, checking meters at a quiet residential property. And then beneath a hedge, sort of hidden in the bushes, they see something that just stops them cold.
It's the kind of discovery that, it just ends the innocence for an entire neighborhood. They found the body of a young boy. And the immediate tragedy wasn't just that he was dead. It was that nobody knew who he was.
Yeah.
There was no missing persons report, no, frantic parents searching the streets, just a John Doe.
And because the police had nothing to go on, the media latched on to the one distinctive thing they could see in the photos, which was his T-shirt.
Yeah.
It had this bright, colorful design of lollipops on it. And just like that, he became known across the entire nation as Baby Lollipops.
That name, it really stuck. It sounds so innocent, almost sweet, but the reality behind it is one of the absolute darkest cases in South Florida history.
For sure.
We're talking about the murder of 3-year-old Lazaro Figueroa. But today, we aren't just recounting the crime itself. If you look at the source material, and we're mainly drawing from the Wikipedia article on the murder of Lazaro Figueroa, what really stands out is the timeline. This was not an open and shut case.
No, it definitely wasn't.
Yeah.
This thing spanned 27 years. We're talking 3 separate trials, 2 overturned death sentences. It's a legal labyrinth.
Exactly. Our mission here is to sort of unpack how a case with such, overwhelming physical evidence of abuse could drag on for nearly 3 decades. We're going to look at the forensics, the, frankly, bizarre defense strategies, including a confession from a random teenager, and the systemic failures that kept this story in the headlines all the way until 2017.
And before we get into the, the really grim details of the discovery, I think we need to set the stage a bit. We're looking back at 1990 from where we sit today, but the atmosphere in Miami back then was, well, it was very specific.
That is such a crucial point. When the police eventually did identify the boy as Lazaro Figueroa, the focus shifted to his mother, Maria Cardona, and her partner, Olivia Gonzalez. So what you have is 2 women, both immigrants, in a relationship involved in the drug scene.
I noticed the source material references a memoir by Hakira Diaz called Ordinary Girls, and she makes a really, really interesting point about the media coverage at the time.
She does. Diaz points out that the media frenzy wasn't just about the crime itself. It was fueled by the otherness of the perpetrators.
Right.
The coverage was heavily laced with anti-LGBTQ plus and anti-Latin American sentiment. The narrative wasn't just a mother killed her son. It was painted as this sort of deviant lifestyle that led to depravity. And that bias is important to keep in mind because it very likely played a role in the public pressure and potentially the courtroom atmosphere during that first trial.
That makes so much sense. It just amps up the temperature in the room before the jury is even seated. But let's go back to the physical evidence, because regardless of the media spin, what the medical examiner found was, well, it was objective and it was horrific. You mentioned the workers found him in the bushes. What was the actual condition of the body?
Catastrophic is, I think, the only word for it. When the police arrived, they found Lazaro wearing blue gym shorts over a soiled diaper. But the diaper wasn't just, put on. It was held in place with brown packaging tape.
Tape.
Wrapped around his body multiple times.
That detail alone, the tape. It's like he was being treated like a package, not a person.
And it gets worse when you look at the biometrics. Lazaro was 3 years old. A healthy 3-year-old usually weighs, around 30 to 35 pounds?
Something like that, yeah.
Lazaro weighed 18 pounds.
18, that's the weight of an infant, like a large 6-month-old.
Exactly. He was 8.16 kilograms. He was literally half the person he should have been. The medical examiner, Dr. Bruce Haima, he determined he was severely malnourished, anemic, and dehydrated. But the starvation, that was just the baseline. The autopsy revealed a roadmap of torture that had been going on for at least 18 months.
So this wasn't a sudden snap or a one-time thing. This was a lifestyle.
Precisely. And the forensics tell that story so clearly. Dr. Haima found a cigarette burn on his left cheek. His upper front teeth had been knocked out. But the bone injuries, that's what really indicates the duration of the abuse. He had fractures in his arms, but one arm was permanently fixed at a 90-degree angle.
Stuck at 90 degrees? How does that even happen?
It happens when a bone breaks and you don't go to a doctor. The body tries to heal itself, but without a cast, without setting the bone, It just calcifies in whatever position it's held in. It suggests he was left in pain for weeks while that bone fused completely incorrectly.
That is just agonizing to even think about.
And then there were the bed sores. We usually associate bed sores with, elderly patients in hospitals who can't move. For a toddler to have bed sores, it means he was bound to a mattress for extended periods, unable to shift his own weight. The diaper was caked with excrement and taped to his skin, causing chemical burns.
Okay, so we have this picture of long-term systematic neglect and torture, but what actually killed him? Was it the starvation?
No. The immediate cause of death was a blow to the head with a baseball bat. It fractured his skull. And the autopsy found a really specific injury, a tear to the corpus callosum.
I've heard that term, but break that down for us. What does a tear there signify?
The corpus callosum is it's the bundle of nerve fibers connecting the two hemispheres of the brain. To tear that, you need massive force. We're talking something like a high-speed car crash or a violent shaking combined with impact. It causes a shearing effect in the brain. And Dr. Haima dated this injury to just hours, maybe days before death. So despite months of starvation, he was ultimately beaten to death.
And while this is happening, or immediately after, we have to look at the behavior of the mother, Maria Cardona, and her girlfriend, Olivia Gonzalez. They dump the body in Miami Beach, and then they go on a trip.
This is one of those details that really blurs the line between denial and just psychopathy. Shortly after leaving Lazaro's body in the bushes, Cardona and Gonzalez fled to Central Florida, and they went to Disney World.
Disney World, the quote, happiest place on earth.
While her son was decomposing in a hedge.
I'm trying to wrap my head around the psychology there. Is that just fleeing? Or is it a complete dissociation from reality?
I think it's likely a mix of both. It suggests a profound compartmentalization. They were escaping the crime scene, yes, but choosing an amusement park. It suggests they were trying to overwrite the horror with some artificial good time, or maybe they just lacked the emotional capacity to process what they had done. It speaks to a profound lack of empathy.
So the police eventually connect the body to Cardona. They arrest both women, and immediately the finger-pointing starts. This brings us to the core dynamic that drove this legal saga for the next 3 decades. Who turned on whom?
Well, it's the classic prisoner's dilemma playing out.
Mm-hmm.
Olivia Gonzalez cracked first. She took a plea deal. She agreed to testify against Cardona in exchange for a 40-year sentence for second-degree murder.
40 years is still a hefty sentence. She must have been absolutely terrified of the electric chair.
Oh, absolutely. And in exchange, she gave the prosecution the narrative they needed. Gonzalez claimed that on the last day of October, Cardona got angry because Lazaro was moving too slowly while taking off his diaper. She testified that Cardona hit him with the bat until, and this is a quote, a hole was opened up in his head.
In Cardona's defense, what was her story?
Cardona played the battered woman card, but with a twist. She claimed she came from this wealthy lifestyle that fell apart when her husband, who was a drug dealer, died. She claimed she fell under the spell of Gonzalez. She painted Gonzalez as the monster, the one who beat the boy, the one who controlled the house. Cardona claimed she was so traumatized by seeing the abuse that she did copious amounts of cocaine just to numb herself.
So the defense was, I was high and scared, so I couldn't stop it.
Exactly. But in 1992, at that first trial, the jury just wasn't buying it.
Yeah.
The physical evidence, the child's weight, the bed sores, it made it really hard to believe the mother was just some passive observer. Judge David L. Tobin called it the most heinous, atrocious, and cruel abuse he had ever seen. Cardona was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death.
The first woman on death row in Florida, that feels like a definitive end. The gavel drops, justice is served. But then we fast forward 10 years to 2002. Why does the Florida Supreme Court step in?
This is where we get into something called a Brady violation.
We hear that term in legal dramas, but what does it actually mean in this specific context?
So imagine you're playing a card game, right? But the other player is hiding half the deck in their lap. That's a Brady violation. The prosecution is legally required to turn over any evidence that might help the defense. In this case, the prosecution sat on interviews with Olivia Gonzalez, their star witness.
What was in those interviews that mattered so much?
Inconsistency. The defense argued that in those suppressed interviews, Gonzalez's story changed, or had details that contradicted her trial testimony. If the jury had known that their star witness, the only person who said, "I saw Cardona swing the bat," was unreliable, they might have voted differently. So the court said the trial wasn't fair, conviction overturned.
That is just wild. You have a dead child, clear evidence of torture, but because the prosecutors hid some paperwork, You have to do it all over again.
That's the system. Process matters. So in 2010, 18 years after the crime, we go to trial number 2.
And this is where the story takes a turn that honestly sounds like fiction. The defense comes up with a new theory involving a teenager named Gloria Pye. Who is she?
This is maybe the most bizarre chapter of the whole saga. Gloria Pye was a mentally disabled 14-year-old girl, and the defense suddenly claimed that she was the one who killed Lazaro.
How do you even make that stick? Did she even know the family?
The connection was tenuous at best, but here's the kicker. Gloria Pye actually confessed. She signed a statement saying she threw Lazaro against a wall.
Why would a teenager confess to a murder she didn't commit?
That is the million-dollar question. It's likely she was confused, maybe coerced, or just simply didn't understand what she was agreeing to. She later retracted it completely, saying she never even met the boy. But for the defense, that confession was gold. They didn't need to prove Gloria did it. They just needed to create reasonable doubt that Cardona did.
The old, if this girl says she did it, you can't be 100% sure my client did.
Exactly. And it almost worked.
Yeah.
The jury was genuinely confused by it. During deliberations, they asked the judge to have Gloria Pye's confession reread to them. They were seriously considering it.
That is terrifyingly close.
It is. But ultimately, the total lack of physical evidence linking Lazaro to Gloria Pye's house swayed them back. The prosecutor called it a diversionary tactic, and the jury agreed. Guilty verdict number 2. Death penalty number 2.
So 2011, she's back on death row. But while all this legal maneuvering is happening, I want to pause and talk about the passage of time. I mean, it's been 20 years since the murder. What is happening to the rest of the family? Cardona had other kids, right?
She did. She had an older son, Juan Puente. And his story is just the tragic shadow to this whole legal circus. While his mother is fighting for her life in court, Juan is spiraling. He had what was described as a revolving door of arrests. He was deeply addicted to drugs.
It's the ripple effect. The trauma of that household didn't just kill Lazaro, it destroyed Juan too.
Tragically, yes. He actually testified for his mother in 2010, pleading for her life. But he couldn't save himself. He died in prison in 2018, serving time for burglary. He just never really escaped the legacy of his childhood.
That is absolutely heartbreaking. So back to Cardona. She's on death row again in 2011, and again the verdict gets thrown out. This time, it wasn't a hidden tape. It was about inflamed passions. What does that even mean?
The Florida Supreme Court ruled that the prosecutor in the second trial went too far, emotionally. They argued that the prosecution spent too much time trying to make the jury hate Cardona, calling for justice for Lazaro in a way that blurred the lines between facts and pure emotion. The court said the arguments improperly inflamed the minds and passions of the jurors.
So basically, you made the jury too angry to think clearly?
Exactly. And in a capital case where you're trying to execute someone, the process has to be clinical. So in 2017, 27 years after the body was found, we go to trial number 3.
And this time, the strategy changed completely. The prosecution took the death penalty right off the table.
They just wanted a conviction that would stick. They were tired of the appeals. But the defense tried something really, I think, intellectually fascinating this time.
This is the bad mother defense, right?
Yes. Cardona's lawyer, Stephen Yermish, stood up and essentially said, okay, you're right. She's a terrible mother.
That's a bold opener.
It is. He argued that Cardona was guilty of aggravated child abuse. He admitted she neglected Lazaro, she let him starve, she failed to protect him. But, and this is the crucial distinction, he argued she was not a murderer.
I see where he's going. He's trying to thread the needle. I let him get hurt, but I didn't swing the bat that killed him.
Precisely. He was trying to separate the neglect from the fatal blow. Since the only witness to the bat strike was Olivia Gonzalez, who we know had credibility issues, the defense argued you can't prove Cardona struck the killing blow, and if she didn't strike the blow, she's not guilty of first-degree murder.
Technically, legally, that's a valid argument, but emotionally, when you're looking at a child who weighs 18 pounds...
That's just it. The jury couldn't separate them. In the eyes of the law, certainly in the eyes of that jury, the starvation and the torture were part of the murder weapon. You can't starve a child for 18 months and then say, oops, I didn't mean for him to die.
So third time's the charm.
Guilty of first-degree murder. But because the death penalty was off the table, she was sentenced to life in prison.
Yeah.
And I think the judge, Miguel de la O, he really captured the sentiment of the entire ordeal during sentencing.
He didn't hold back, did he?
Not at all. He told her, there are wild beasts that show more empathy for their offspring than you showed Lazaro. It was a final condemnation of her humanity.
Wild beasts. That really sticks with you. So let's zoom out. We have a case that started in 1990 and ended in 2017. Lazaro would have been 30 years old by the time his mother was finally put away for good.
It's staggering. And it really highlights the friction between legal justice and, I guess, moral justice. The legal system is designed to be slow, to be careful, to protect the rights of the accused, hence the overturned verdicts for procedural errors. But the cost of that process was nearly 3 decades of reopening these wounds for everyone.
And it leaves us with a really uncomfortable question about culpability. Cardona spent 27 years saying, I was just a bystander. I was a victim too.
Right. And the system eventually said no. The system decided that a mother has a non-negotiable duty to protect her child. Even if Olivia Gonzalez did swing the bat, Cardona's failure to act, her failure to feed him, her failure to call 911, that is the murder.
But I guess the provocative thought here is about the bystanders in the system itself. If the prosecution hadn't hidden those tapes back in 2002, or if they hadn't been too emotional in 2010, could this whole thing have been resolved 15 years earlier?
That's the lingering tragedy. Does the length of time it took to get to this result serve justice? Or does the process itself become a form of injustice for the victim, who's just waiting for his story to be closed? It's a really hard thing to reconcile.
It really is. A case study in how the system works, for better and for worse. If you want to dive deeper into the legal specifics, we've linked the source material in the show notes. It's a heavy read, but it's an important one.
Definitely. There's always more to learn when you look at the details.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.